Let's see if we can't get a couple more commissioners on here. Before we start the meeting. Fareed, I think you need like an explorer's Spanish conquistador's helmet with the map in the background and the beard there. If you wanted to take the theme all the way.
That would be creative.
I know you have that bent, but that's my creativity, not yours. So I you know.
Right, all right. I've got a lot of different hats. I don't think any of them are shaped quite like that.
I think this is everyone we're expecting. Robert's planning to arrive 30 minutes in.
Okay. Then let's call to order this installment of the Transportation Commission. And if I can get a roll call, Mr. Freed.
Yes, Commissioner Chavendell.
Present.
Commissioner Pang.
Yeah.
Chair McCroskey.
Present.
Vice Chair Graham and Commissioner Del Rosario are absent. Commissioner Del Rosario is expected later.
Okay. I would like to read the following land acknowledgement statement. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lejeune. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and to together build a better future for all that now make this their home. With that, we'll move on to public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the public to comment on items that are not otherwise on our agenda this evening. And you would use the raise your hand feature, usually at the bottom of your screen or with the ... on your phone, and we'll look to see if anyone has any comments this evening. We usually give 3 minutes for public comment for each attendee.
We do have one hand raised. That's Tom Newton. Go ahead.
Mr. Newton, are you you're still, there you go.
There I am. I just wanted to add my 2 cents worth to the truck problem on side streets, residential side streets. I was out front weeding in my house in 900 block of Santa Fe 20 minutes ago when a Safeway truck rumbled down the street and then turned left on Marin to go up to the Safeway, no doubt at the other end in either in Berkeley or the one through the tunnel. And I can't, we've got to do something about replacing signs that used to be put up. And then we have to replace, we have to start enforcing the law. I can't imagine when the last time one of our cops pulled over a Safeway truck and said, hey, pal, you're not supposed to be here. Stay on Solano. And I know it's difficult driving Solano, but you're a truck driver. You can handle it. Then you're going to look tonight at the police reports on the number of citations issued. And we don't issue traffic tickets anymore. I wish we did, because there's a whole generation growing up that thinks that they don't have to obey the stop signs and the street lights, because they don't ever get ticketed. Nobody gets ticketed. I don't know what they do, but that's another subject altogether. And that's my 2 cents worth. Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't see any other hands.
Then let's bring it back to the commission, and I'll just say we don't usually bring up topics that are brought to us during public comment, but I will say that the topic of oversight of the police is now being handled by a new commission, and that's another opportunity to perhaps voice your opinion, sir. With that, we'll bring public comment to a close and move on to presentations, starting with the monthly police data. Mr. Freed, you're muted.
Thank you. Here we go. Reporting for the month of April, 2 pedestrian vehicle collisions were reported. 1 bicycle vehicle collision was reported. There were 15 vehicle collisions overall, 7 of which were injury collisions. 22 moving citations were issued, and 2 DUI arrests were made. That concludes the presentation.
Great. Thank you. Are there any commissioner questions on the data presented? Seeing none, is there any public comment on what has just been presented?
I'm not seeing any hands, Chairman Markowski.
Right. So we'll bring it back to the commission. Are there any opinions or comments on the data that we've seen? Seeing none, let's keep moving. Thank you. We'll move on to shared mobility data if we have it.
Yes, so gig car share has moved to quarterly reporting. I'm working on continuing to get monthly data from them to continue our charts, but they did provide me the first quarter, January through March numbers with 686 monthly memberships across the 3 months and 1,700 total trips, which equates to about 6% increase in the number of trips and a 7% decline in monthly active members. The other item I would report, just an update that 3 electric scooter and bike companies are launching in Berkeley. I think at least 1 or 2 of them have already launched, but Freed can correct me if that's incorrect. 2 are out. I've seen at least 1 across the border in Albany so far. I have not yet heard from the vendors. It's Veo, Spin, and Link, but we'll continue to monitor that, and hopefully once they're settled, they will be looking to expand into Albany as well. That's my presentation.
Great. Any commissioner questions? Please, Commissioner Peng.
Hi, since I'm new, I'm just gonna ask this question. I already have my neighbors and friends asking when is Veo, right? What's the name of this company? Gonna extend their service in Albany. What I know from Berkeley, well, we have an expert here in Berkeley, is that Berkeley proactively kind of issued the RFP. Is that correct? And so their company coming and bid for it. So is Albany gonna kind of wait, or what is the mechanism that we can get things rolling for our citizens to enjoy this new mobility program? That's my question. Thanks.
To date with these, we have not set up a whole permitting program process for Albany. We've piggybacked on operators that are operating across the border. We don't think that someone would solely come to serve Albany. So we've just required them to basically have a business license to be able to operate here. We don't have other rules on the books that would regulate them, but they've been good partners to date, not requiring us to make a lot of more additional rules for them. But this commission has monitored as others have deployed previously. We've had presentations from them and tracked their usage and data and issues is how we've handled it to date.
Great. So if there are no other commissioner questions, we should turn to public comment. We have at least one interested individual.
Yes, one moment. Okay, Jeremiah, go ahead.
Good evening, everybody. I just logged in the meeting. Can you just remind me what agenda item we're on, please?
We're talking about mobility. and recent data.
Oh, 3.2, the presentation.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, so shared mobility, we've got the zip cars, we've got, there's room for improvement on the bicycles and then the scooters. There's a lot of things online, something like a person of the public I could do. I could charge these things at my house in the garage and then just go drop them off, like a couple at the high school, a couple at the library or community center, a couple down at the city hall, basically where our city's buildings are would be good spots. They probably end up on Solano. I know some of them might end up, on the sidewalks. So, but maybe we can, try to park them on the bike racks. I was on the freeway last month. I sent an email to you guys, to your commission, and I saw a Zoom car on the freeway in an accident right before Albany on Gilman. And, I just hope they're safe cars, for the public. And I was just wondering if there's incentives we can reach out for to make it, less expensive for the public, And so there's a lot of things. I did miss the presentation, but I think that, Albany could have its own electric shuttle bus, like a gym car, like Sid has, but the bigger one, it's electric, and there could be doors and seatbelts, and it can just drive up and down Solano all day. I mean, literally just a free ride up and down Solano, and that'll help people do minor tasks, possibly, that need to go up the hill, like senior citizens or people with minor disabilities that just got injured. They twisted their ankle playing basketball, but they got to walk or something because they don't have a car and they can't ride the bike because their ankle. But hey, let me get to Solano. I can always count on the city's, zero emission free ride up and down Solano. I mean, I'm sure in the future, 20 years from now, of course, there's going to be an electric car going up and down Solano offering free rides from the city, so maybe we can try to implement that. And all the ride shares in Albany should be electric. We should try to be going electric. Our senior citizen bus, all the transportation stuff. Keep up the good work, guys.
Thank you. Any others interested in public comment on this item? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commission. Are there any additional commissioner comments or opinions on this? Seeing none from others, I'll just say I've been driving around and riding my bike around Berkeley and seeing the increased, sharing devices, and it's great. Seeing a little bit of them in Albany, but not much. From past experience on this commission following these issues, we don't really seem to benefit greatly until that there's sort of overlap with adjacent communities and with access to BART. We're a small community. It's not as easy for us to attract contracts, and we're kind of at the whim of where companies want to locate. So hopefully they'll want to expand from Berkeley, and hopefully through Albany into Richmond and El Cerrito, so that our residents can really get around the whole neighborhood. With that, unless there are any other commissioner comments, let's close this item out and move on to our consent calendar. We have the Transportation Commission meeting minutes from April 28th as the sole item on our consent calendar. Are there any who any commissioners who wish to pull this item? And then we should ask the same of the public. I do see a hand, so let's do just 30 seconds.
Go ahead, Jeremiah.
Thank you. I would just like to, double check to make sure that in the minutes from last meeting, that I had suggested a future agenda item of school zones and possibly, can you possibly bring that up in your work plan? And that's about it. Thank you.
Okay. I know for sure that your request for school zones to be addressed is in our permanent record as part of tonight's agenda. So it's definitely there. I don't recall if it's in the minutes, but I do know it's recorded this month. Are there any commissioner comments, or would somebody like to form a motion? It's considered bad form for the chair to propose motions. I appreciate your help.
I would be happy to move it since there's only 3 of us here, but I wasn't here last month. So I'm happy to vote yes, but I don't feel like I should be the one to move it.
Right.
Well,
I can do it.
I'm thinking maybe you shouldn't vote yes since you weren't at the meeting.
Right.
And in fact, let's do this. Let's do this. We're expecting one more commissioner to show up. That would give us a quorum of 3 who attended the meeting, which would be a much more proper way to pass these minutes. And I would give Jeremiah a chance to reread the minutes and make sure he's in there. So I propose we table this item and return to it at a later point in the meeting. With that, we're going to move on to item 5 and to item 5.1, the citywide pavement condition evaluation and pavement program planning.
We'll be bringing in David Lamb to introduce this item.
Hey, good evening, commissioners. So for item 5-1, we've got a twofer. We've invited consultants, Pavement Engineering, that helped the city prepare the pavement management plan update that was just finalized in April of 2022, to give a presentation that talks about fundamentals of pavement management, as well as some highlights from the 2022 pavement management plan update. And then I will follow their presentation up with a short presentation talking about the selection of candidate streets for pavement maintenance and rehabilitation. So with that, I'll introduce our consultant, Joe Reary. He is the senior principal engineer with Pavement Engineering, and he's also the head of pavement management and design. And Joe has almost 30 years of experience in pavement management. And so I'm really looking forward to learning a lot in this presentation. With that, I will turn it over to Joe.
Thank you, David. Chair McCroskey and commissioners of Albany, it's great to be able to be with you this evening. We've prepared a presentation that, let me pull it up. Oh, wait, first I have to share my screen, don't I? One moment, please. Okay. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Perfect, perfect. Okay. The presentation goals for this evening are to review some basic pavement 101 principles, and then to talk about pavement management principles, to review our assessment findings for the city of Albany, and then talk about funding needs and review some recommendations that we see might be important, be considered by the city of Albany, given the state of of your pavement conditions. So let's start off and talk about Pavement 101. So a pavement, the pavement structure is actually dependent on the loading from the top up in here and what it is built on. The worse the soil is and the heavier the loads, the thicker the pavement structure needs to be. When pavement deteriorates, it deteriorates not linearly. It follows this S-shaped curve where the pavement looks good for a while and then drops off quickly and then levels out in a poorer condition. And we've seen that as we've driven on roads before, where we drive a road, and then one day we realize, wow, when did this road get so bad? That's because it's starting to fall down into this area right on the steeper part of the curve. Asphalt pavement deteriorates in two different ways. The first way is through the environmental effects, the oxidizing effects of the sun and the water, and the second is from the fatigue loads from heavy vehicles. So in each of these different cases, or the impact of the sun and the water actually breaks down the binder that is holding the aggregates together. So the aggregates are glued together with the oil, and as the oil is exposed to the oxidizing effects of sun and water, it age hardens and becomes brittle. It actually will begin to burn out the volatiles and will lose mass. And as it loses mass, the pavement shrinks and cracks begin to form. And as those cracks form, then the pavement opens up and water can be introduced into the structure. When we talk about the impact of heavy loads, it was always difficult for people to be able to wrap their head around it. And so we came up with this chart that allows us to think about pavements in a more user-friendly way, or the truckloads in a user-friendly way. So what we did is, many years ago, we got a Chevy S10 Blazer, and then we called that one vehicle and then compared it to different types of trucks, 2 axles, 3, 4, 5 axles trucks, buses and garbage trucks, and fully loaded 5 axle trucks, and equated it to our Chevy S10 Blazer. So one 2 axle truck, typical 2 axle truck, is equal to 442 Chevy S10 Blazers. One 5 axle truck, fully loaded, delivering to Safeway or Lucky's, is going to be equal to almost 15,000 Chevy S10 Blazer units. And so when it comes to pavement design and pavement structure, it's not the busyness of the road that really impacts the pavement design. It is the loading on the road. So I wanted to, as a prep for the information that we'll be sharing about the pavement management system, is just to remind you that the pavement management system was designed as a budgeting tool. It's an inventory tool. It's a place to be able to record pavement conditions, and it's a guide to be able to select potential street candidates for future repair and maintenance. It was originally developed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers during World War II as a way to be able to rate the conditions of their runways. Since then, we've adopted it and use it as a way to be able to talk about our pavements. It's a scale from 100 to 0, 100 being in excellent condition, no defects, 0 meaning that it has so many defects that you would consider it failed. And there's a gradation that happens throughout there, similar to, you can almost think it like about it as a report card for your pavements. It's dependent on the different types of distresses that are exhibited in a pavement structure. These are 4 very common types of distresses. There's on the left is weathering and raveling. It's where the fines begin to wash off or wear off from traffic. And then the middle two slides are talking about that shrinkage that we talked about from the environmental effects. It's opening up in this slide here where the pavement seam is. It's the weaker part of the pavement. And then in this slide over here, you're seeing what we refer to as block shrinkage cracking. The slide all the way to the right is alligator cracking. It's a fatigue type of a crack. I want to point out to you that the first three pictures are all about the pavement, are all distresses caused from environmental effects. The alligator cracking is from the loading, or from the heavy loading, which means that you can build a brand new pavement and it's still going to deteriorate even though it never ever sees a vehicle. So as part of the pavement condition update, we went out and we assessed the pavements of Albany, and we looked at a number of different types of distresses. We measured them, we quantified them, and then put them together into PCI. PCI stands for a Pavement Condition Index. If you have no distresses, then you give it 100. If there are lots of distresses, as exhibited in the photo over here, then you give it a lower PCI score. And it's kind of interesting in this picture, you can see that one side of the road is heavier or received more deterioration than this lane of the road. And you'll see that that's because this is a truck route. And you can see that the distresses are really concentrated in the wheel paths, which is where it is absorbing most of the loading. So when you go out and you look at pavements, at least for me, I start seeing, the pavement starts talking to me and telling me a story about itself and what's happening and what's going on. And that helps with the design process. Of course, this just reminds us of why we have roads in the first place and why they're important. Okay, so with that background, let's come into some pavement management principles. This is the most important principle when it comes to managing your pavements, and that's just simply applying the right treatment to the right pavement at the right time, which is how the Federal Highways Department defines pavement preservation, and I like to add using the right materials. So the right treatment, the right pavement to the right time, using the right materials. We can illustrate this if we go back to our deterioration curve and recognize that if we have our PCIs running along this axis here, and we have time running along the x-axis on the bottom, that there's optimal times when different treatments are going to have more impact on a pavement. For instance, when a pavement is in good condition and cracks are just beginning to form in the pavement due to the shrinkage that's happening, then it's a great time to be able to crack seal those gaps and keep the water away from it. But if you have a pavement in really poor condition, you don't try and seal all the cracks because you're never going to be able to catch up to everything. In fact, it's a waste of money, just as it's intuitively a waste of money that if a few cracks begin to show, you're not going to reconstruct the road. So the principle is doing the right treatment to the right pavement at the right time. As long as I've been doing this, I've only come up with 3 different types of pavement management strategies. And let me talk about each one of these. The first one is a focus, or we refer to it as a best first or top-down type management, thinking of, if I've got limited dollars, where do I want to spend my money? And the first one is just focusing all your money on the very best pavements and ignoring the rest of them. Another type of strategy is taking all the money that you have available and focusing them on the worst pavements, and selecting your pavements based on the worst PCI. Both of those strategies, while they can be effective in a short-term type of a situation, will not yield long-term sustainable pavement management. And in fact, if you always are focusing on your very best pavements, then if you think how the deterioration is occurring, you end up with a lot of pavements in good condition and then a whole bunch of pavements in the poor condition without any in the middle. If you're dealing with the worst first type of a situation, then you're just anticipating that every pavement is going to be in a failed condition, and it's the most expensive time to be able to address those pavements. So what do? You employ what's called a critical point management style system, and that's best illustrated with this graph right here. So here's our deterioration curve, and we recognize that there's optimal times when there's treatments that are involved, and what you're trying to do based on what this red circle is telling you is you're waiting for the pavement to deteriorate to where it gets to this point, and the associated treatment with that will actually improve the condition of the pavement. You try and catch those pavements before they fall down into the next category, needing the next treatment. And so you'll see that we're doing that at several points along the deterioration curve. So a good pavement management system actually is pulling from all different parts of the curve at the optimal time for the deterioration of the pavement. And by doing that, you get the longest sustained impact to your pavement. Okay, so let's talk about our assessment findings. For the city of Albany, just to remind you, you have just a little bit over 30 centerline miles. A centerline mile is if you take the very center of the street and you measure that distance. It's regardless of whether it has 2 lanes, 4 lanes, 6 lanes. The number of lanes is not counted here. It's just the centerline miles. So 30 centerline miles, and you have a total of a little over 5 million square feet of pavement. Your system-wide average weighted PCI right now is a 60. Now that 60 also includes some upcoming treatments that have been scheduled for the 2022 year, and my understanding are right around the corner from construction. But what I want to emphasize is that your 30 centerline miles, or over 5 million square feet of pavement, has a replacement value of over $134 million. That means that you have a $134 million asset that you're trying to take care of. That asset is just the pavement only. It does not include curb and gutter. It does not include curb ramps. It does not include sidewalks. It's just the pavement section only. Okay, we divided up the system, looking at it from a functional class point of view. A functional class for a roadway is how it is being used. And so your arterials are the most used streets, often the most busiest. Your collectors are the next most busiest. And then you have residential streets, which are the streets that are neighborhood streets that the houses are usually on. And then you have some alleys as well that we classify as others. So our system right now, and this is your 2022, includes the streets that are just done. So you're going to have a 60 PCI. Your arterials are a 55, your collectors are a 60, your residentials are a 62, and your alleys are actually a 62. And I thought it would be interesting to compare this over the last couple of years so you can see a trend that your arterials are you're not focusing as much on your arterials, they're dropping. Your collectors are staying pretty much the same. Your residentials is where I can tell from this data that you're focusing your dollars on. And as a city, you were dropping in 2021, but with the scheduled work that's upcoming, you're looking at maintaining your system here. Okay, this is a really instructive chart. Let me explain it to you. We've taken your PCIs and we've grouped them together into 10-point groups. So here's the 100 down to 90, here's 90 to 80, here's 80 to 70, and you can see how we're grouping those together by square footage over here. And so when you look at this graph, you can see kind of a spread of the conditions. The fact that you don't have a lot in this lower end lets me know that you're really focusing on your worst first streets, and that you've got a pretty even spread across here, which tells me that you need to employ your critical management type of selection is going to help you the best, because you're trying to capture all of these streets before they drop down into a worse condition. Okay, let me keep moving here. Let's talk about funding needs. Your system, in order to maintain your 60 PCI, needs an investment of $2.6 million per year annually in order to hold it there. Your current budget is only $1.9 million per year. So that's why you're seeing after 5 years, the trend line starting to separate, because you're not spending enough money. If you wanted to increase your PCI by 5 points, you would need to spend $3.9 million per year annually. And if you spend nothing, then you can expect your PCI to drop to a 47 in 5 years. What your system wants to do from an optimal point of view is it wants to operate at an 83, but it would take you $35 million in that $35 million expenditure in that first year to get you to that condition. But then in order to maintain it, it takes over years 2 through 5, it only takes $700,000, $800,000 per year in order to maintain it. So if you could get that high, then your maintenance costs actually goes down. So we wanted to review what happened in 2021. So in 2021, Adams Street and Washington Street were worked on, and the scheduled work for 2022 are listed here: Carmel, Cornell, Evelyn, Jackson, Keynes, Marin, and Masonic. Street sections are all slated and designed and have been included in the PCI that was represented with the 60. So here's what my recommendations are based on what we're seeing for the city of Albany. First of all, you'll want to maintain your pavement management system. It's a great way to be able to understand your pavements and to be able to communicate with those around you, with stakeholders and with your constituents. The PCI is easily understood by people, and you get instant feedback on how you're doing with your pavement management. I really recommend that you employ the critical point management style. Your project should include not only rehabilitation, but your maintenance. If you think of that graph where we looked at the 10-point spread, you've got streets that need maintenance and you've got streets that need rehabilitation, and you should be developing projects that employ all of those. You want to really focus your limited funding to preserving your critical assets. And I would suggest that you look at your arterial system, which over the past few years is showing a constant decline. And you'll want to take your limited dollars and look at those, but also understand that you can, with the next point, you want to try and leverage your limited dollars with grants and on grant eligible streets, which are typically the arterials, but you want to look for complete street grants and safe route to school grants that are available to the city. And a grant writing effort can pay back in a lot of ways. And then you might want to consider some additional funding sources. I've seen other agencies be successful with utility impact fees, understanding that perhaps your garbage trucks are, or your, I'm sorry, I'm going to talk about those with the Refuge. So let's go over to Refuge impact fees. So Refuge impact fees are recognizing that the garbage truck trips are using up a great deal of the roads. Or the road's service life. One garbage truck is equal to about 9,000 Chevy S10 Blazer units. And now that we're running 3 garbage truck trips per week, we're consuming a lot of pavement life. And talking about now 4 garbage truck trips. Some agencies are considering 4 per week. Your utility impact fees are recognizing that as utilities cut into the street, that the pavement condition actually deteriorates faster when you do that. The only time that it doesn't is when the utilities cut into a pavement that has already failed, in which case I've seen PCIs actually go up. But usually a failed street, you're not, well, I'm just going to say that utility impact fees are a way to be able to get some additional funds that you can allocate towards your streets. Sales tax measures and parcel tax measures have also been successful, and then some agencies have even used those available funds and leveraged them into bonds, and that to infuse the needed money right away, improve the condition, and then maintain it at a lower level. And that concludes our presentation about the condition of the city streets based on our assessment. So back to you, David.
Great, thanks, Joe. And I'll ask the commission to hold on to your questions. I'll continue on with my presentation. That's really building upon the topics that Joe's brought up. And I've got 7 short slides to go through to talk about pavement maintenance and repair candidate streets. So I will share my screen, and then we can take questions on both of the presentations after mine. All right, I think that was the right screen. So, again, with this presentation, the purpose is really to inform the commission of the selection of the streets that are candidates for pavement maintenance and candidates for rehabilitation. And then I'm going to discuss the considerations or the inputs that went to the selection of those candidate streets. So diving right in, the first consideration is really where we have the spread of current and our upcoming projects. Joe went over locations of some of those. One thing that I'll add is Cleveland Avenue and Key Route Boulevard are currently in planning, and they've been identified as one of our upcoming projects. The next item is planned and tentative sewer construction, and on a similar level, any known utility projects, we try to plan around those locations. Say if East Bay Mud is planning on relocating a water line, then it doesn't make sense for us to pave it into a nice street only for their necessary construction to break into fresh pavement and leave us with something that's less than the perfect pavement after we're done with it. So we try to avoid those areas when they're known. Another consideration is project complexity and cost. So if a project has additional design considerations, say transportation elements, if we need to regrade a street or add curb ramps for ADA compliance, if we need to relocate or repair storm drain assets along that street, then that's really going to add to the cost incurred for reconstruction of that street. And that's going to lower the amount that we have available and lower the coverage of pavement that we're aiming for. And of course, we look at the latest round of pavement condition index from our most recent report. And we try to see if there are any gains to be had for construction efficiencies just based on proximity, so we can lessen the amount of the cost of mobilization. So this is a modified slide that I repurposed from Joe's presentation that shows the pavement deterioration curve. So I want to highlight two types of projects. We're talking about maintenance projects. That's really your sealing of the pavement, crack seals, slurry seals, chip seals. That's highlighted in blue. And then once the pavement condition drops past a certain level, then we're really looking at more costly rehabilitation projects where we may need to grind and overlay fresh pavement on the surface, or if the deterioration is severe enough, then we would want to reconstruct the street, possibly down to, and complete some repair of the street base before repaving. And once we get down to that level, it can get very costly for those projects. And then a third category that aren't shown are projects that have more complex design considerations that could be anywhere along that deterioration curve for the pavement. So we'll start off with a map showing the streets for maintenance treatment. I'm not going to list all the different streets and segments. I thought it was better to show it visually like this. So I'll let you take a look at it. But I'll cover some key statistics for this list of candidate streets. So again, if you recall from the past slide, we're looking at targeting streets that are between 70 and around 90 in pavement condition index. And this will be streets that are candidates for sealing, more superficial treatments. We have about 4.8 miles of these streets on the list, covering an area of 81,271 square yards. And then I thought it was interesting to show the coverage by functional class. About half of those streets on this list are residential streets. A quarter of those streets are classified as other. And for the city of Albany, this other classification includes streets that have bicycle facilities. So you can see that Ocean View bicycle path is included in this list. Other category also includes some residential streets that have bicycle facilities, like Pomona Avenue is one example. So that's where we get our list of others. And then the remaining quarter is split up almost equally between collector streets and materials. Next up is the streets that are candidates for rehabilitation. So of course, these streets are going to be lower in PCI. So we're looking at a median PCI of 45 for this collection and an average PCI of 41. And that's a total centerline miles of 6.7 centerline miles. And this is a coverage of 118,739 square yards. And then looking at the breakdown by functional class, about 3/5 are pulling from residential streets. And then collectors, arterials, and other streets make up the other 40%. And I thought it was interesting to overlay the rehabilitation streets and the maintenance streets candidates together, kind of show a citywide coverage. So you can see the maintenance streets in blue, rehabilitation streets in red. I also highlighted the current and upcoming projects. Current projects going out in 2022 are highlighted in the light purple, and then upcoming projects in the teal color. And I also talked about, avoiding conflicts with potential utility work. So some identified locations where we have potential sewer projects coming up include a cluster up near Brighton Street, cluster between Solano and Washington, and then bounded east and west by San Pablo and Masonic. And then some potential sewer work down by Dartmouth. And I also wanted to point out that there is an absence of streets down in the south side of the city, south of Marin, where East Bay Mud recently completed their Cornell cluster water line replacement. And so we're waiting to see, after East Bay Mud comes through with their pavement restoration, what the pavement condition looks like. And, we may add those streets to the list to complete those streets. So just a couple of final points to touch on. I want to emphasize that the list of streets that were selected as candidate streets, that's not a final list. We don't want to not take a look at a street. When it's brought up to our attention, there's room for adjusting our coverage if we see that there are worthwhile projects. And again, the selection of the projects from here really depends on determining what our available paving budget is, what the available staff resources are for implementing these projects and seeing them through to construction. And then design considerations, whether we have grading, storm drains, transportation elements, and elements that really add to the cost and limit the coverage of pavement. Something else to emphasize is this is just one cycle of street selection that we're going through, or street candidate selection. There will be future cycles. This is an evolving process. We're going to get another update of our pavement condition in a year, and a report coming out after that. So we're going to go through a cycle, see what the most recent data shows, and we will reevaluate the candidate streets in future cycles. So if there's a street that's not in the current list, then we could add it in our list for this cycle, but there's a good chance that it can make future lists. So we want to make sure that we get coverage for our pavement. And then, showing what our next steps are. We've completed our latest PTAP report in April of 2022. Right now, our current step is creating an initial screening of those candidate streets. Next up, we will discuss what our future paving budget looks like and clarify that picture, likely associated with the discussions about our capital improvement projects. And once we determine our budget, we're going to need to go out and actually conduct investigations of all of these streets, see what their current condition looks like. We're basing our initial screening off of information from a single number, PCI index, and there could be a number of factors that contribute to that, whether it's really bad localized deterioration compared to widespread damage to a street. That all gets summed up in a single number, and we really need to take a look at a street to see what the correct treatment would be, and that determines our cost and how much paving we can achieve. And then, final step would be finalizing a list of projects to move forward to design and construction. So, Joe touched on this. Our ultimate goal is really to improve Albany's citywide system pavement quality, knowing that we have limited or finite amount of resources to dedicate to paving. And we want to make sure that, Albany citizens have the best pavement available with that finite amount of resources put into pavement improvement. So that's the end of my presentation. Maybe what I'll do is send it back to this map that shows the overall coverage. And I'll let you chew on that and digest and move on to questions for either my presentation or Joe's presentation on our pavement management.
Thank you both for those presentations. And we'll take it back to Commissioner questions about the presentations. And welcome, Commissioner Del Rosario. Good to have you with us. So, Commissioner questions about either of these presentations. Seeing no others, I'm curious. I guess last time we went through this process, I remember using an MTC tool that helped evaluate PCI and spit out priorities for remediation and maintenance. Is that tool no longer in use, or is that sort of in the background here?
If the tool that you're thinking of is Street Saver, we do use the tool. We do still use it. Street Saver is really the database from which we draw all of our information, street locations, pavement condition index. And it's a good way to show spatially where these, where we need the most work as well. Street Saver does have a function of making recommendations. I think that using Street Saver's recommendations solely is still limited for the reasons that I touched on, that if you look at PCI as your main metric, then that doesn't tell the whole picture of the pavement condition. That's one way to look at it, but you still need to observe what's contributing and what the inputs are that lead to that number, that PCI for that street segment.
So it doesn't give a full picture and you use additional criteria, I think is what you're saying.
That's correct.
Great. You mentioned briefly that the other category includes some of the bike route streets, but I didn't notice cycling routes as one of the input criteria. I think in the past we've directed staff to prioritize bike routes. So is that involved in some way?
Not in this current first pass of selection of candidate streets. That is something that we can look at to see PCI numbers for specifically bicycle routes, and if they fall within a range that's appropriate for maintenance treatment or rehabilitation treatment, then we can add those to the candidate list as well.
Commissioner Del Rosario.
Related to that question, whether the same could be considered for other modes such as transit or commercial streets or commercial loading or commercial vehicles of a certain size, which may have a bigger impact on the roadway.
Yes, that's something that we did not include. Typically, I would say in the past, we have paved streets that are east-west running collector streets. Those have been prioritized. That doesn't specifically look at, say, truck traffic or loads. But if you look at the coverage of recent projects, then those east-west running streets that serve as collectors for the city network have been paved more recently. As streets deteriorate from the loading, that'll also serve as a natural feedback for kicking them back into consideration as projects. So they would naturally get considered more often than other streets with less loading.
So if I may jump in quickly on this, is also that I think on the other categories, we're trying to raise streets. The reason we separated the bike lanes into the other category was to try to be able to identify that as a separate category so we can raise all the different streets kind of simultaneously. We're trying not to focus on one type of street over the other. And this allows us to make sure that we're monitoring each type of street independently to try to get them all up. So we're not just with residential streets getting, good PCIs, everything's kind of slowly rising up and floating up. And then in terms of other categories, I think that's something that we take a look at more in terms of overall coordination and also in structural design. When we're getting into transit and other features that take heavier loading, that's when we're looking at what kind of detailed design category we're falling under, what kind of full depth restoration or increasing our traffic index. And I would say generally our transit streets are also ones which are arterials and collectors where we're probably putting quite a bit more construction dollars towards, just due to the complexity of the streets.
Great.
Can just add one note on that. The MTC has indicated that they are intending to update Street Saver to accommodate more multimodal complete streets considerations. I think their focus continues to be on adding sidewalk and other features rather than adding more ability to really divide other factors like bike facilities or transit. I've reiterated this commission's feedback on that, so I'll continue to push that as they talk about that, but I don't know exactly what will go into that. But that is something that MTC is discussing in terms of changing the software itself.
If I could jump in just for a moment, there is a feature within Street Saver that allows you to be able to have user-defined fields. And we've utilized those for agencies that are looking to track their bike system or their transit systems or special categories of streets. It doesn't change the functional classification of the street, but it is a filter that you can use to sort the data by and gather information from on specific street classification or how streets are being used. So if this commission wanted to dig deeper on breaking out the transit or breaking out the bike lanes or something, there is a way to be able to do that pretty easily within the program.
I would like to maybe jump in here just for one thing, because I was involved in the last one, and we did spend a lot of time, and we specifically identified the other category to include those residential streets that that are also designated bike routes, because we wanted to separate and be able to track those, and then have parameters to make sure the investment in those streets and treatments that we use were appropriate for bikes, and that we could then see, essentially have another asset class that we're tracking. And the idea was that the rest of the bike facilities either fall into the collector or arterial categories, which were given a slightly higher priority. So it was, we tried to the extent we could build that in, and I think that basis is still in this analysis, even though if we didn't highlight it the way we did last time.
Well, it does appear in the report, and Chair McCroskey, and right now the bike lanes or the others have an average of a 62 PCI, which is higher than your overall city average of 60.
Okay. I have another question. Mr. Riri, in your experience, generally, in our climate, how much of the destruction to pavement is due to weather and versus overall how much to wear?
Great question. With pavement design, you try and make it a 50-50 split and trying to anticipate what the loading can be. What we are seeing right now with the increased traffic loading in California, we're seeing that predominantly a lot of the distresses are being caused from the fatigue loading, or our roads are being asked to do more and carry more loading than they were originally designed to do. And that is a general statement that I make. Talking about the climate of the Bay Area, more moderate type of a climate, you're seeing that the environmental effects, while still there, it's more of the loading effects that we're seeing. And that's coming from a couple of things that I am also seeing in trends. I mentioned in my presentation the garbage truck trips. We've increased that as a society and in communities where we feel that that's important, but it is taking a load. Our streets are the ones that are taking the brunt of that. Electric cars and electric vehicles are heavier than a conventional gas-powered car because of the batteries. And so as we transition more and more towards the electric vehicles, we're going to see an additional impact on our roads. Not that can't be accounted for in the design, and we do account for it in the design, but those roads that weren't originally designed to carry that kind of loading will deteriorate faster than expected.
Interesting. Thank you.
Have an additional question, Chair. So thanks, Larry, for your presentation. I noticed most of the trucks, trash trucks, when they're doing collection, they're doing one way, right? They park on one side and then pick trash from both sides of the street. I'm just curious, it would be helpful for them to change the route. So they are parked on the different street on different days. Is that helping?
Anytime a heavy vehicle is on the pavement, it has an impact. And so when I think of pavements from a design point of view, we're trying to build in a we're trying to account for all of the loading that that pavement is going to be seeing over its design life. And I think of it like a bank account. And when a heavy vehicle drives over that pavement, there's a withdrawal from that pavement. And when it gets to zero, it's zero and it starts to fall apart. Now, if you can, just like that one picture was showing, if there's a certain route on one lane that it's always going up and down, it will deteriorate faster than the other lane was deteriorating, or the pavement in the other direction. So if there's ways to be able to shift that around, yes, absolutely, you can make a difference.
Thanks.
That was a good question.
I'm not seeing any other questions. I'm going to go ahead again. We as a city, and I assume most cities, tend to consider their waste management contracts separately from their pavement management plans. At what point do you get to a point where it makes more sense to spend more money to use smaller garbage trucks versus putting more money into pavement? And are we anywhere near close to that?
Was that to me, Chair McClough?
Anybody who's willing to take it.
I'm not seeing garbage trucks get smaller unless they're in communities with tight, small streets. Otherwise, they are just loading up the garbage trucks with as much as they can. And I will point out that garbage trucks are not monitored like our bigger trucks on the freeways. And so I would imagine by the end of the day, they are all overweight, or you could probably guess that they're at or overweight, and which is consuming more pavement life. So it's a serious problem, but I'm not seeing any designs of trucks trying to minimize the loading impacts. You might have hit on something right now. If you wanted to work on the design of a truck and try and figure out how to spread the load, you could probably make a whole bunch of money right now.
Not my expertise. My expertise is asking annoying questions.
Oh, okay.
Any other commissioner questions? Let's go ahead and turn this over to public comment. Again, use the raise your hand feature at the bottom of your screen, or using the triple dots on your phone, and staff will open it up.
Our first one is Jeremiah.
Hey, Chair McCroskey, you're great. Keep up the good work. Oh, and I'm so glad you're here. So we got Climate Action Committee here at the same time. This is cool. So I'm glad about that. So here's my comments and questions. So, I mean, all this oil on the pavement is bad. It runs off into our water and goes into our creeks and damages the fish and wildlife, you know. So how about like using cellular concrete? I was just Googling this whole time. I had a lot of time to Google. And all the bridges and industrial highways are made out of concrete. And that makes the most durable pavement. It lasts for 50 years. And so I don't know, what kind of pavement have we been using? Down Cornell a few years ago, we repaved it, and East Bay mud came in between Marin and Solano on Cornell and just tore up the whole street right after we paved it, and to put in a water pipe. You know, I'm getting ready to call East Bay Mud at this point for damaging our streets. I can't wait to go to one of their public meetings. So, oh yeah, water runoff, climate action. I was about to send an email about that, but I'm glad you're here. So what sub-base do we use for the, you know, the bottom part for rehabilitation? Because cellular concrete could be a really good sub-base if we have to do some rehabilitation work. So let's see, I'm really happy that you're repaving Cornell and between Solano and Marin again. I mean, you're repaving the same street within 5 to 10 years, all because the East Bay mud ripped it up. So the cost of that street should go directly to East Bay mud because they were the problem. That's the only reason why we're repaving. So we should submit a claim for their damages. Let's see here on my notes. Got some really good ones. So yeah, basically I did some math, and the $134 million with 34 centerline miles, that's $4 million per mile. So it's going to cost $4 million per mile based on that total Albany city streets. So yeah, just why don't we check to see if maybe certain types of concrete or pavement works on better streets. You know, Solano and Marin, maybe more high traffic. So we use a little different material for that. Maybe the residential streets, a different material. So maybe we can do different for different streets where it fits best. So what's the PCI, you know, for I didn't see you had cellular concrete up there. It wasn't up there. So, and the school zone grant could provide alternate funds of resources for around the school streets. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. I'm not seeing any other public comment at this time. So let's bring it back to the commissioners. We have not discussed composition or materials in this discussion, but I'm assuming that the city is monitoring current best practices, and I know for sure that different materials are used on different streets is appropriate. So I don't think we necessarily need to discuss that. Are there commissioner comments and recommendations at this point? Right, Commissioner Del Rosario.
I think just based on our questions, there's some way that staff can incorporate multi-modes into the factors for determining pavement priorities. I think I can appreciate that commercial vehicles and transit. One, they are going to be on limited streets, but two, they will naturally rise up to a need because of the weight of the vehicles. But with limited resources, it probably is still a good idea to try to point those out as a separate factor anyways. And the same with bikes. Of course, not the weight, but the same with having that need.
Thank you. Commissioner Pang.
I just want to second Commissioner Del Rosario's suggestion. I think when you give priorities, please take a look at the Albany Active Transportation Plan. Maybe some of the routes should be given priority because of that. Thanks.
Great. Anything from Commissioner Javadel? I'll either take that as a no, or you can unmute yourself.
I do. I just had to get to the unmute button. I think I agree with what's been said about prioritizing the active transportation network, and I think that that's consistent with what we've been doing, and tracking those streets separately certainly is helpful to our efforts to maintain that. You know, in the past, we've done repairs on Masonic that were targeted at kind of cracks in the bike lane, you know, rather than doing a full street rehab. And I think that makes good sense. Sometimes it's, you know, not precisely crack sealing. It can get a little bit creative. And I think that's, again, consistent with what we've been talking about and what our practice has been. So I hope that where we're trying to stretch our resources, we continue looking at things like that. I don't see it as a big shift. But I do think it is something I support continuing to make those efforts.
Thanks. I'd like to say that I honor the complexity of this issue and appreciate staff's attention to the details. We've spent a lot of time over the years on pavement and analysis and prioritization, and it's easy to get sucked into that. And I know that it takes a lot of time and attention. I definitely appreciate that. And I did appreciate absolutely the presentations this evening. And Mr. Riri, I appreciated your scale that addressed how loads disproportionately affect the pavement. I'd like to challenge you a little bit on maybe on your choice of vehicle, and the length of your scale. I mean, you actually start at a weight of one SUV, but really there's more data there that off the scale. There are smaller vehicles that share a roadway, and your point about electric cars could contribute to your infographic. So I'll just put that out there. I was an information designer in a previous life, so I have to excuse me.
Thank you. Good input.
I think your choice of standard vehicle aligns pretty well with our standard police vehicle at this time, so it's not unreasonable. But there are certainly a lot of other vehicles out in use, and the new challenge of heavier electric vehicles. I'd like to mention that with our local road safety planning, we have the opportunity to kind of see where the data overlaps. And there might be places that we could do some road repair, minor or perhaps major, instead of redesigning areas if it's indicated that the pavement quality is causing problems. So we should all be cognizant of that. If there are any other commissioner comments, now would be the time. Seeing none, I would like to thank staff and probably bring this item to a close unless there are any further staff comments. Seeing none, I'd like to thank all staff and the consultants, and let's move along to our next item. Item number 5.2, the 2022 Pavement Design Program.
Allison Correa will be presenting this one. You're on mute, Allison.
Thank you. I'll give a second for everything to shift around while people get promoted up and down. But good evening, everyone. Happy to be back. I'm unfortunately, we weren't able to be in person. We just missed it this month. But we're following the steps of the pavement management plan update that we just heard. We're bringing in one of our projects for review and recommendation for approval, hopefully, tonight for the 2022 annual pavement rehabilitation project. This is one that was last presented at a conceptual level or planning kind of like street layout level with this commission about just a little under a year ago. These are streets that are primarily residential, no major transportation elements, but require some curb ramps and other improvements that are generally required for paving projects. With that, I'm going to share my screen and go over some of the details. I'll start with the pavement section, and I think with the recent Pavement 101 presentation, I'll go into a little detail about how we select our section, just to give a little bit more depth to what it is that goes into a design here, followed up by some of the striping and signage improvements and proposed changes. And then finally with showing how the Albany preferences for curb ramps have been incorporated into the project, including some of the probably focusing on some of the locations which were a little bit more complex and required a little bit more creative thinking. With that, let me share my screen. Can everyone see my screen here?
Yes.
Okay, great. As I mentioned, we're...
Ms. Guru, could you switch to the slideshow mode? Some of us have fairly small screens.
Oh, this is a PDF. So there is
a slideshow mode in PDF.
There is. Wonderful. Give me a
Control
second
L.
while I figure it out.
Yeah, just press Control L.
Control L. That was very helpful. I never knew about this.
Great.
It may take me a little longer to navigate if I don't have bookmarks, but if you bear with me, we'll get through this.
Great.
So starting off, these are the locations of work. I think Fareed mentioned Masonic and the bike lane. We are specifically targeting 2 blocks of Masonic intersections next to the Greenway, which is an existing bikeway. In addition to that, we have Carmel Avenue, both north and south of Solano Avenue, Evelyn Avenue, south of Solano. We have Cornell Avenue, including the recent East Bay Mud pavement area, which we are actively coordinating with East Bay Mud on to determine best next steps to ensure that we can balance getting the residents there a street that is in usable condition as soon as possible against mobilizing twice in quick succession. So this is an ongoing kind of item that we're dealing with. Keynes Avenue, which is a bikeway in the ATP, and we have some, we would like comment on that one in terms of the bikeway treatment, and Jackson Street down in the lower left-hand side. So diving in a little bit more detail, I don't want to make this meeting too long or this presentation too long, but I did want to take this opportunity with Joe's recent presentation to kind of dive into what our decision process was here. What you'll notice is that on some streets, we have thicker sections of rehabilitation towards the center line of the roadway. And what this was is, after site investigations, we identified the same issues that that Joe mentioned, is that we have alligator cracking running primarily in the travel lanes. Streets within Albany are generally fairly narrow. We have some natural traffic calming because of that, where cars have to pull off to the side before being able to pass another vehicle. And what that means is that we don't always see the rutting exactly in a consistent wheel bed, but you'll see sometimes it's not exactly in the parking lane. It's not exactly at the crown or, approaching the crown. And so we have these thicker sections on certain streets where we're just seeing more of that happening, with a slightly thinner section towards the parking lane where we're not getting the same kind of loading. Other streets where we're not seeing evidence of kind of this difference in loading patterns, we're doing a more consistent section through the street. And this is on top of, and I'll point out some of these locations where you see dig outs. So these are addressing the concerns on the section. So the roadway section isn't just the asphalt on top. Roadway section is also the underlying subbase, and that provides structural stability as well. And so what happens is that we are looking not just at taking care of problematic areas where we're seeing structural failures. We're not just taking care of it on the surface level and paving it over. We have locations identified in the plans where we go down deeper and evaluate. And if it looks like the structural failures need more work, we will continue to go down until we build a thicker section in that area to account for the failures and try to avoid having those continual failures in those areas. Let's see, moving down through the rest of the plan set, we get to the pavement layout. On these sheets, some of the things that I would say that would come to, everyone's attention are these darker spots here, or this darker intersection here. This is Washington and Carmel. This is a location where we had to do some curb ramps. And I've mentioned before in commission meetings that in order to achieve our running slope in the crosswalk, we have to do more work in intersections, and it leads to more challenges and more costs. This dark spot here, what this is indicating is a full reconstruction of this intersection. And we had to do it for a variety of reasons related to street drainage, maintaining street drainage, related to a more significant crown in the area, and just general need to, constraints that didn't allow us to raise sidewalks in comparison to lowering of streets as much as we were hoping for. These do increase the costs of our projects, and we try to account for them in the PTAP, but because they are something that is site specific, it's a little hard to quantify in any kind of in a very detailed manner. And so occasionally on streets we find that we're doing quite a bit more work in intersections, but the resulting ADA ramp is compliant and far more pleasant for everybody to navigate. In addition to that, on these paving projects, and here's another one on Dartmouth where we're doing something similar. Where possible, we do try to find more creative ways, including if there's storm drain, adding storm drainage can improve our ability to minimize how much cut we have. It's often more cost effective than to have to deal with significant soil offhauls and the disruption to the neighborhood. On Portland Avenue, we identified, again, this is a fairly new ramp, unfortunately, but due to cross slopes, we needed to make some adjustments here. But this is the only one at this intersection that was identified for improvement. Following this, these are the signage and striping plans. So this is where we show the red curb policy, where we show our crosswalks, any kind of transportation element improvements are primarily shown on this page for these types of residential streets. Specifically for this sheet, what you're seeing here is the Carmel and Washington Avenue traffic calming. This, I believe, came through Transportation Commission a few years ago, and we are incorporating it into this current project. This was to provide enhanced visibility crosswalks across Washington Avenue. This project, in order to provide this crossing as recommended by this commission, we needed to upgrade ramps, and the ramps in this area, one of the constraints was the storm drainage. And so it really was a project that was more appropriate for a paving project like this than a project that was a standalone. And so now that we have the opportunity, we've added it to the limits and we're taking care of it here. There is, in terms of striping, I did want to point out that we have enhanced visibility crosswalks in the north-south direction and standard crosswalks in the east-west direction. And this was based on the recommended treatments from the last time this was brought to commission. You will see on other intersections, we are doing enhanced visibility crosswalks in all 4 directions, and that's something that we would appreciate comment on. Moving through the plan set. Primarily, again, replacement of existing striping, red curb policy, and here on Dartmouth is one of these locations where we are proposing to have 4-way enhanced visibility crosswalks. I may have to ask Justin to chime in a little bit, but I think this is a more recent policy that's being implemented. And is in this plan set not consistent between the two intersections and could benefit from some discussion. And on Castro Street at Jackson, I'll go into a little bit more detail on the rationale when we get to the curb ramps. But at this intersection, we have two proposed bulb outs, and they're fairly small diameter or fairly small radius bulb outs, primarily due to curb ramp construction. We have some very narrow sidewalks in this area, and desire to make sure people understand that on this side of the street here, this is a retaining wall and there's no accessible pathway here. So we were trying to guide people not to cross the street here, even if there's no ramp. Finally, our project also includes some of the designs that are shown in the Masonic intersections improvement. This is due to coordination. We have a lot of projects occurring in the Solano Masonic and the Marin Masonic intersections in short succession. What we're doing here is that in order to make sure that we have costs for this work, we are proposing to have the striping in a couple of different projects, meaning that the Masonic intersections project is likely going to come in first. However, with supply chain shortages, there's no guarantee of that. And so we're showing these improvements in a variety of projects, and we will remove them if necessary when it comes time for construction based on the actual timing of work. These are all items which are unit cost items and easily quantifiable. Again, these are intersections. I think these are more self-explanatory, so I'll jump over them. This is Washington at Carmel. This is the traffic calming measure intersection. As you can see, we have designed for separated type A ramps as much as possible in this area. We had sufficient planter space to be able to accommodate. We've also made it a point to ensure as much connectivity within the crosswalk, so that pedestrians crossing are not seeking the ramp on the other side. They're directional and in the direction of travel with the detectable warning surface, so that it's more navigable for people who are in wheelchairs. In this intersection, what you'll see is that we have storm drain improvements coming in on this side to relocate an existing storm drain, which was in conflict with the existing ability to bring in a curb ramp. Additionally, we have included retaining walls. We're working with the property owner to have that constructed underneath an existing stacked stone or stacked cinder block to keep that retaining curb out of the pedestrian path of travel. And that was a desire from previous discussions to keep raised curbs out of the path of travel as much as possible. Similarly, in this instance, we have similar retaining structures, and we work with property owners if we need to for relocation of their planting and or encroachments. This one in particular, this intersection at Castro, I wanted to speak to in a little bit more detail. This one was a fairly challenging intersection for residential street. That's due to the steep slope of the Castro Avenue or Castro Street connecting roadway. Because of the ADA considerations on crosswalks, not only do we need to provide a maximum running slope in the direction of travel, but a cross slope as well. The current cross slope here is fairly steep. In order to make sure that we have a flat cross slope, we have to, and this is something that all cities encounter. It's a challenge anytime we're in areas where there are steep slopes. We have to slightly increase the slope of the approaching street in order to create a level land or a level crossing. In this case, we are increasing the slope from approximately an existing 16% slope to a slightly more than 20% slope that then levels out right before the crosswalk. Additionally, we are proposing bulb outs at 2 locations, as I mentioned previously. The first one being here on the west side of the street, coming down the stairs. The current ramp and the configuration of where the stairs end doesn't allow for sufficient level landing. And so in order to make sure that we have a compliant ramp, we're proposing to very moderately bulb this area out to provide sufficient space. One of the details that we worked out is that we are having a retaining curb here, again, to guide pedestrians or people, especially people who are visually impaired, to avoid having them come onto this door zone next to the retaining curb. We really don't want people navigating and thinking this is as an accessible pathway and ending up in a situation where there's no good outlet. So this retaining curb will be here along with some bollards, some flexible bollards to assist with visibility and navigation. As pedestrians come across the street, we have a modified C catch base curb ramp to allow for both directions, access through both directions. We've worked with our designers to provide a detail for how these detectable warning surfaces are put together to ensure that we have consistent dome spacing. And this is something we worked out in the field with our last project on Washington Avenue, and one that we're moving forward with to provide as much compliance as possible with a modified C ramp to provide dome spacing that is directional for wheelchair users. Crossing over to this side on the northeast corner, over here we again wanted to clearly indicate to anybody who's using this path that crossing in this direction will not lead to any kind of pathway. And to do so, we put a retaining curb here and a planted area with a bulb out here. We did try to do this without a bulb out, but with a skinny planter extending out to the extent of the curve, it ended up being something that was likely going to have issues with visibility and with cars touching the curb as they, or damaging the curb as they come around. This is a much more substantial, visible improvement. Again, with the modified Cs. And then here, this is Masonic at Portland Avenue. We are making some minor changes to this one. We are extending out the detectable warning towards the south to provide a crossing that is as wide as possible. Currently, it's kind of squeezed. And extending the width of the detectable warning band in the ramp to match with the incoming pathway, similarly to what we did on Masonic intersections. And with that, that's like the fairly long presentation, and I hope to hear some comments and answer questions.
Thank you. Commissioner, questions? I'm not, Commissioner Javedal.
It looked like the intersection of Carmel and Marin, the corners are getting straightened out or squared off more there, which is great. I'm just curious if that was part of the in addition to better traffic calming, trying to address the drainage issues at that corner.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm glad you caught that. So that one, we have the same designer working on both the Marin Avenue project and this one. And that improvement there is part of the ATP proposed reduction of curb radii for pedestrians. It has led to some storm drain improvements that are needed on this project, and we're working through that.
Thank you.
Other commissioner questions? Right. I don't have any either. Let's take it to public comment.
Okay, Jeremiah.
All right. On the first couple of slides, it showed not a bird's eye view. What's a lateral lateral view called? I don't know. A worm's view? Instead of a bird, a worm. Okay. Worms are on the ground. So from a worm's perspective, actually, yeah, it is a worm because it's all in the dirt. We could see underneath the ground. Perfect. So a worm's point of view, I couldn't tell the grade on those streets. I zoomed in, I took a screenshot and I zoomed in and I couldn't see any numbers on a percentage of grades on the streets. Some look steeper than others. The angle was a little bit less or more. And so I was just kind of curious what the grades were on there, and if possible, future things, you could put those. Also, thanks for teaching us something new, Control L. I wrote that down. I was just wondering if the PDF slides are available to the public, and how would we be able to download the slides for this presentation? And also, I was wondering, in the bigger picture of things, the Senate, the county, okay, we're local, and but still though, the taxpayers are paying a lot of money for these streets to be done. You gave a great presentation. There's just a lot of pork fat on a lot of this stuff, and it's like the agenda is great, but when it comes down to it, who's getting these contract jobs for the replacement of our streets? Is it someone in Albany that made a company? Because that's good, because that's local jobs and that's good for our businesses. I was just wondering who the contractor is. Do we use the same person every time, or does every single street we open up to a new contractor, a new bid, and we go through the selecting a contractor to do that? Also, what would it cost for Caltrans, to come and do our streets? Maybe use their equipment, kind of thing. Oh no, I was just gonna say that, $4 million for one mile of streets is a lot of money. You could build a lot of homeless shelters for that. But with fixing these streets, you're just making our streets faster and more unsafe. So if we're going to repave a street, we got to put a speed bump somewhere. The faster you make these streets, the newer make these streets, the faster the traffic is and more unsafe it is. Hey, just let the streets go bad. At least those cars.
That's your time.
But thank you, Chair.
Thank you for your comments. I don't see any other public commenters. So I think we'll bring it back to the commission. Commissioner comments, further questions? We were asked for some comments on crosswalk design, especially Carmel and Washington, for example. Commissioner Del Rosario has unmuted himself.
Oh,
Does
sorry,
that mean you have questions?
No, still intently looking. I may have questions. So.
There is a lot of information here.
Yeah.
And, thank you for the presentation. Since nobody else is stepping forward, I will say the curb ramp treatments in this plan are highly evolved and have taken into consideration a lot of our previous comments. Thank you. It's a challenge with the height differentials and the spacing requirements. So I appreciate that. Absolutely. Well, we did have a question from the public about, who ends up contracting on this. And it's my understanding that the city has pretty straightforward procedures for getting bids and that those are finally approved by the city council. But would staff like to make any comment on that?
Sure, I can go. So in this case, we did a couple, and I'm going because of this predated Allison. We did go out to a competitive bid to select a contractor for the suite of projects that we're working on right now. We made some adjustments to that, but by and large, we do like to do competitive bidding or competitive solicitation of contractors for design services as well as construction. But we also realize that there's times where we're always seeking sort of best value for the city as well, and sometimes that that's taking advantage of a contractor or a consultant that's working on one project and adding something else to it to get efficiencies. So we try to look at all of our sort of options to get the best value for the city.
And then you present that to city council and
yes,
and
absolutely.
Forward.
Everything, contractors over the thresholds go to city council for approval, and we're pretty clear on what we're doing.
Right. So there's a high degree of visibility.
Yes.
There just aren't sweetheart deals involved. I just want to make that clear because it's clear to me from working, from being on this commission for a long time that that's absolutely true. Great. Other commissioner questions or comments? I will admit I have forgotten why the crosswalk should be high visibility in one direction and not in the other at Carmel and Washington. It has been a few years.
This predates my time as well, but I have previously reviewed the prior traffic calming requests. The focus, my understanding was the concern was crossing Washington to access the school. And the focus of that discussion was on making it a safe crossing of Washington. That was the concern and why the high visibility was focused on that crossing. We have, as Allison alluded to, when we decided on updated our high visibility crossing to the 444, we've been implementing that anywhere on our active transportation priority pedestrian network at all 4 crossings of intersections on that network. That's how we've been implementing that. So that's the difference between the two. Dartmouth is on the network, Washington wasn't, but we had this recommendation from this body for the Washington crossings.
Thank you. I do remember that the neighbors who requested and received the upgrade of the intersection to 4-way stop were most concerned that there were marked crosswalks in all directions. And I think this satisfies that desire, which is reasonable. Still looking for any questions or recommendations from commissioners? And Commissioner Javanel?
I think that the design for the crosswalks there makes sense, given that Washington's a high volume street, has the high visibility crosswalks. As presented, looks fine. If there's no other questions, I'm happy to move the staff recommendation that council approve the project as designed.
Allison did mention one other element, just in case there is feedback on it. The plans do show sharrows on Canes south of Marin.
Oh, yes.
It is in the ATP network as a bike boulevard treatment, but we presented sharrows to be consistent with the Canes Adams pilot project, which is utilizing sharrows and is going in imminently. So want to confirm that there's a reason for either way. So if there's feedback on that before we proceed with the plans, that would be the time.
Who has comments on that?
I guess I'll ask a question in terms of the timing. How big a gap are we expecting between this and then completion of that project?
Canes Adam is currently awaiting, I guess, medium lead items for the K72s, which are in back order. So we're looking at about 3 months to 4 months for materials. And this one would probably be in approaching award at that time, assuming we can either advertisement or award, assuming we don't have any major hiccups along the way.
In that case, I would
You're doing a little speaking of staff to staff. Just to be clear, that I think you were saying that it's nearing or looking at nearing award of a contract for implementation.
For the construction, correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think, assuming everything goes smoothly, we would be looking at sometime fall for construction, fall to early winter for construction on this project. And Canes Adams would be a couple months before that.
And consistency makes sense to follow the same striping plan.
I have a contrary opinion. I don't remember, here again, the choice of sharrows on the for the Canes Adams north of Marin, except those boulevards are I think quite a bit more busy. The area south of Marin, ties into the Dartmouth area and more of a quiet streets area. We have sharrows on San Pablo. There are recommendations. There are indications that bikes have a right to be there in addition to automobiles. Whereas, bike boulevards are supposed to be bike priority. And in my mind, this connection on a quieter street to Dartmouth is a bike boulevard and warrants full marking as such and priority for non-motorized transportation. So that's two of us. Do we have other opinions from commissioners?
I agree with Chairman Crosby. It makes sense to me.
Commissioner Peng, do you wish to dive in?
I agree. It's a good idea.
Okay. So looks like we're on the side of bike boulevard markings. So do we need to add that to the resolution?
Happy to add that clarification. So
can I also may I also suggest that we in our recommendation to City Council that we highlight what we learned in our last presentation, that whereas this project is going forward, we're looking at a long-term deficit of funds to keep our streets up to the current level of quality.
Yeah. So to speak to that just briefly, I'm not sure if it's appropriate to go too much in depth since it's kind of devolving from this agenda item, but this is something that we'll be speaking to during the CIP update, the forthcoming CIP update in more detail with council.
What's the timing on that?
We're aiming
generally.
We're aiming the next couple months.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Then if I may, I'll update the motion to be, I move that we ask council to approve the 2022 Pavement Rehabilitation Program with the inclusion of sharrows on panes.
Okay. Does anybody want to second that motion?
I'll second that.
Commissioner Peng. Any further discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Freed, if you could take a roll call vote.
Here's my mute. Yes. Commissioner Del Rosario,
Yes.
Commissioner Javandel,
Aye.
Commissioner Peng,
Yes.
Chair McCloskey.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you for keeping moving forward on these projects and working towards improving our streets.
Thank you very much, and we'll hopefully see you soon with the next project.
Great. Thank you. We put off an item, and that was our consent calendar, which had the sole item of the meeting minutes of April 28th. Commissioner Del Rosario, we were waiting for you because Commissioner Javandel was not present at that meeting. And there was also a question by a public member about the notation of one of his comments. So at this point, I'd like to briefly reopen item number 4.1 or 4, the consent calendar, and just briefly check in with that member of the public, and then see if there are any commissioner changes to the minutes, and see if we can't get a resolution on the minutes. So I think this is a yes/no question. So can we give 15 seconds to member of the public, Pinguello?
Yes, just a moment. Go ahead.
You're live.
Go ahead, Jeremiah. You know, there are 2 here. Sorry, there's 2 versions of him.
So yeah.
The one that can talk.
Which one do you want me to talk on, you guys?
We can hear you now.
Hear you now.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
Jeremiah, go ahead.
I closed the Samsung Chromebook. Okay. So I just basically wanted to double check the minutes to make sure that it's on there that I had requested during future agenda items for a future agenda item regarding school zones. Thank you.
Well, I'm not sure I got my question answered, but since he didn't say that, since we gave Mr. Pinguello a chance to review the records, which are attached to the agenda, I'm going to say we move forward. I would like to entertain a motion or any further discussion on the minutes.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Commissioner Rosario,
I'll
thank you.
second that.
Commissioner Peng, thank you. I'm assuming no further discussion. This would be a motion to move the consent calendar, I'm assuming. And Mr. Freed, could you take a roll vote?
Commissioner Del Rosario,
Yes.
Commissioner Javandel,
Abstain.
Commissioner Peng,
Yes.
and Chair McCloskey.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. All right, with that, we return to the regular flow and item number 5.3, the long-term Parklet program.
Thank you, Chair McCloskey. So this is revisiting item from last month, proposed guidelines for long-term parklets. Brief refresher, the temporary outdoor dining program began almost 2 years ago now. And we currently have 15 installations along Solano Avenue between San Pablo and Ordway. We began discussing a revised program in the fall, given the duration of COVID impacts and interest in continuing in-street installations. We presented survey results in January and last month at the commission meeting for an initial draft program guidelines document. The draft guidelines separated out the requirements by section. I'll go through briefly the changes that were made since last month's presentation. New sections include brief sections on insurance, signage, and acceptable use, and I'll go through the changes to the other sections one by one. For the parklet location and setbacks, we're proposing a limit to 2 vehicle parking spaces per applicant. When reaching a 40% threshold, this is in response to feedback concerning impacts on adjacent businesses. Some of the feedback wanted a hard cap, such as no more than 50% of the block. Others weighed in that concentrating installations made a block a destination. So this was an effort to scale down to 2 as we reach that maximum threshold to balance those 2 factors of wanting to allow concentration where it was desired and useful for the as a destination, but recognizing the concerns around concentrated impact for other businesses. In response to comments, the guidelines also now specify a need to relocate loading and short-term vehicle spaces, and they detail bus service considerations. And we've proposed a few adjustments on the setbacks, reducing from 2 feet to 1 foot adjacent to the travel lane, and increasing from 1 foot to 2 feet on the driver's side adjacent parking space. I don't remember if this commission really weighed in on that, but that was an item of discussion at the Economic Development Committee regarding accessing vehicles in and out from the adjacent spaces. For the perimeter barriers, in response to some of the questions and clarifications requested during discussion, there's some more detail included on the wall, a railing, and barrier requirements and the intention of these elements. We've removed the wheel stop requirement for angled parking spaces and included a requirement for a flexible bollard or delineator post at the corner adjacent to the travel lane at the 2 corners. We still didn't really go into detail on heavy or substantial barrier. There was some discussion around that. We could still do that in the guidelines or in permit application. I cited San Francisco requirements last month. I did find one other example for that from Walnut Creek, where they required 250 pounds or more weight in like a planter style or barrel, something sort of every 6 feet at maximum. As another version, the San Francisco one was based on doing sort of a weighted force measurement at a particular location, or the sort of shear more on the wind side over across the whole surface. On the platform, we did remove the platform as a requirement and switched to recommending that, and we specified the requirements for use as a street surface and adjusted the drainage requirements to accommodate more of a ramp-shaped drainage area along the curb. For ADA, we made some minor changes there. I missed redlining a call out of new reference to potential review by a certified access specialist. So calling that out since I failed to do that in the redline document. And referencing standard restaurant accessibility requirements. For in the fire section, we added some details on electrical lighting. On maintenance, we added that movable furniture should be secured when not in use. We combined the fees and public access sections and changed from 2 fee type structure in the earlier draft to 1 fee, and then with a proportional reduction in that annual fee for providing space for general public use. So that could be through providing public access seating or a bench, or through adding bus stop parklet kind of features where the portion of the installation is for that public use. At this point, this is still then distinguishable from the bus stop parklets as those being more of a permanent change to the curb line and permanent construction materials possible, whereas this is still removable infrastructure and is a little bit different than the first couple of bus stop parklets. So the new sections we added specifying the insurance requirement, limiting signage, and then referencing some other regulations regarding acceptable use, including noise, sale of alcohol, health, smoking, and public nuisance. And then in the removal section, we primarily added clarifications with respect to the comments about flexibility, that, you know, making arrangements with the city does allow for that flexibility on those time limits in the removal section. And we specified a cause for an installation, removal, or revocation of permit. So with that, next steps, we're seeking commission recommendation. We're bringing this back to Economic Development Committee next week as well, seeking their recommendation, and look to bring a program guideline proposal to City Council for approval, at which point we would be preparing final application and guideline documents for use. So with that, our recommendation is to recommend to the City Council adoption of the Parklet program guidelines, but again, seeking your additional comments and feedback on that tonight. Thanks. You're muted, Chair McCroskey.
Thank you. Nobody's immune. So Commissioner questions. Commissioner Del Rosario.
Yeah, a couple of questions. When can you talk about the 2-space limit again on the if 40% of the parking spaces are utilized by parklets? So was the intent of that to avoid large parklets that spill over into the adjacent property, or was it to avoid impact to parking for the businesses on that block?
So the proposal is that you're allowed 2 to 3 spaces, 2 being sort of the standard, 3 with review of staff discretion, review of sort of the context and impacts. But that if you're getting to that 40% of parking spaces on that block are being utilized by parklets, that we would just have 2 and not have that discretion to go to a third space. So we would allow more applications, but we would not allow them to be 3 spaces large.
And what was the concern about that?
The concern was primarily overall concentrated impact of parking, removal, vehicle parking on a particular block.
Okay. And then my second question is on, I think there's an insurance requirement that's there now. I don't know the cost of that insurance, and is that something that's out of reach for businesses, or does that fall within business insurance coverage typically?
I can say that this is the standard requirement that every other city I've looked at has had. And just based on some other work I've done, it seems like it's a pretty standard amount of insurance that most businesses will have. So.
And are we requiring insurance now for the temporary program?
I'm not sure about that one. Just to you right now.
I believe it was referenced as a condition of approval, but I'm not sure we collected documentation of that from everyone for that.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other commissioner questions? Seeing none, let's see if there are any public comments.
Just a
we have
moment.
at least one. Yeah.
Yes, let me reset the clock again here. Okay, and Jeremiah, go ahead.
One 1 second. I'm going to press send. Boom, send. Okay. I was just sending my last group email. You guys will probably get it. Anyway, perfect topic. Thank you, Justin. I've got one thing to say, and I got 3 minutes to do all my saying on this 3 minutes. So I noticed you talk about Solano, or the city, about smoking and alcohol in public. And, you know, the signs that are shall be displayed within the municipal code book, shall refers to mandatory. So these no smoking on Solano signs, because it's a public health issue, you know, we got kids eating ice cream. You know, who wants a cigarette smoker in that little parklet? Can't be smoking cigarettes in the parklet right in front of frozen yogurt and people drinking, you know, cafe. It's not a good look, right? And it's not something we want in Albany. We don't want people smoking cigarettes on Solano. You know, it's gross. We would find a lot of cigarette butts on the ground. You know, a lot of litter, and then kids could pick it up, you know, and go run around the corner and smoke it. You know, so I'm so thankful that we have signs that are 1/3 of a piece of paper. Oh, I'm sorry, half of a hot dog length of a piece of paper that we put up. But, you know, we need signs so the public know not to do something. You know, a lot of people just don't have respect or common sense or etiquette. You know, smoking on Solano. So what happened was a few years back, 5 years ago, I noticed a lot of businesses were not, you know, displaying the mandatory sign. So who carries those signs? Well, let you know, the fire department does. The fire chief didn't have any. So he had to order some. So when he ordered them, he gave me the whole stack. It was a whole manila envelope full of things. I went up and down Solano to every single business. You know, I pop in 5 little monkeys. Hey, you know, can you give this to your manager? You know, it's got to be displayed. Some businesses actually let me put it on themselves, and they're still up today. You know, I go by and watch it. You know, I look at it, and I'm like, I put that there. You know, I've got my positive influence in the city. I mean, I do all over the place, of course, my positive influence, but in an alcohol in public, oh yeah, these city events should be sober free, 100%.
Thank you for that input. Seeing no other public comment, I'll bring it back to the commissioners. And commissioner comments and opinions. Commissioner Pang, please.
Hi, I noticed about the annual fee. It states that installation are eligible for reduction proportional to the area provided for the general public. So is there a more defined terms? Like they're gonna, for example, there are 10 seats, and then if they provide like 2 seats for the public, so they have 20% deduction, or is it by actual like area? So maybe we can put more details on that, so the business would understand it better. That's all. Thanks.
Other commissioner comments and questions? CDR. Commissioner Del Rosario.
Yeah. I'm glad to see that staff did incorporate much of the comments from the commission, and I think there is changes that are made that make the program and permitting process more affordable for businesses, especially those that have an existing one. I'm fine with all of the edits, and I would happily make a motion, but I think I would also recommend that we remove the 2 space per applicant limit. That clause about the 40% of parking spaces I don't necessarily see I don't see its need. I mean, perhaps maybe we need more short-term parking locations, but that seems to be a different topic. But in terms of that clause itself, I would recommend to remove it.
Interesting. Okay. Commissioner Javendal?
Yeah, I think great information, and seems like, you know, fairly thoughtful adjustments in terms of the dimensions and everything, the prorating according to how much of the area is public space makes good sense, and encourages that sort of space to be provided. In terms of the number of spaces, yeah, I don't know what the optimal approach is to ensure that there's a balance between parklet space and parking space. So yeah, that one, whether it's left to, you know, discretion of staff or council, or I don't think we necessarily want to take every parklet to council, right? So if we left it open, does staff feel comfortable telling a particular applicant, no, you can only have 2 spaces? Because if we don't put a limit in there, we kind of run the risk of people pushing it. And so I don't know, what is this a tool that you think you need, or, you know, in consultation with the adjoining businesses, is that something you feel that you can just kind of make the call on a case-by-case basis?
I do think we can make that judgment call. We did incorporate the sort of adjacent impacts in that discretion of 2 to 3. It was a matter of whether providing that some form of cap or threshold provided additional comfort to folks. But I do think the discretion to staff did provide some level of that adjustment capability.
Okay. And I have adequate confidence in staff to do a good job at that, but I'm willing to give them the flexibility and authority to make that call.
Okay. I'd like to say that I observed the Economic Development Commission discussion on this, or committee discussion on this, and I was quite gratified that many of their concerns overlapped and dovetailed nicely with ours. So I think there was a lot of unanimity of concern and strength of the regulation, and that's all reflected in these revisions. So that's great. I'm pretty confident that we're coming to a place of agreement, and it's time to put these forward to City Council. As for the balance of parking spaces, I'm concerned that we don't actually have enough data, and there are some issues that are kind of outside of this. You know, adjusting short-term parking versus long-term parking. The data that we were presented last time on this project was mainly midday data, lunchtime loads, and I just point out that you know, parking control ends in the late afternoon and doesn't really cover the dinner hours. And I know in my neighborhood that the real tough parking time is you know, sometime between 6 and 8. And that's also the big you know, delivery driver flyby, for want of a better word. So I think it's outside of the scope of this particular decision tonight, but you know, bears keeping an eye on going forward, and I don't have strong feelings about the 40% invocation of 2 or triggering of the 2 space limit. I think that might be something that the Economic Development Committee is more interested in than we are. I I think if staff wants to put that in there, that's great. I'm happy to give staff leeway either way. Any last thoughts?
Just want to add that, the applicants will have to make business sense for themselves, right? If they don't need to space, they're business owners. They pay for the materials and constructions. I think they know better. And I totally agree with everyone that I believe the staff have the discretionary wisdom and ability to make the judgment call. So maybe we don't need to add that 40% limit on it.
Yeah. Okay. Would anybody be willing to construct a motion?
Yeah, I could do it. I'm just trying to figure out if there's wording that needs to be put in about staff discretion. Actually, I don't think so. I don't think we need to. So I will put a motion out to approve the amendments to the draft Parklet, what do you call it, guidelines?
Ordinance?
Ordinance. Oh, actually, yeah, guidelines. Guidelines. Yeah. Yeah, a motion to approve the edits to the Parklet guidelines, but including the removal of the guideline that says only 2 spaces per applicant will be permitted for new application if more than 40% of parking spaces for that block are utilized by parklets.
I'm seeing head nods. Any last discussion?
Happy to second that.
Javadal seconds.
Right, can we add that clarification for the fee deduction so business owner understand it better?
I'm happy to make that friendly amendment.
Thank you.
We're seeing kind of an abstraction of what the business owners would see.
True.
But it's fine to clarify.
Yep.
Okay, so the friendly, you accept the friendly amendment?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Let's, Mr. Freed, if you would.
Commissioner Del Rosario,
Yes.
Commissioner Javandel,
Aye.
Commissioner Peng,
Yes.
Chair McCroskey.
Absolutely acceptable.
Motion carries.
Great. That ends our discussion review items, and we move on to announcements. Staff, do you have any announcements?
Just going to note that local road safety plan website is still soliciting input through June, and we've received over 250 comments so far. And was just going to ask, as summer travel is approaching, commissioners, please let me know if you'll plan to be absent in June or July to make sure we have a quorum.
And we should mention at the same time that it's expected that we will remain on Zoom through the summer.
That's right. With the rising case rates, council had one meeting in person, and then we've gone back to virtual. And current plan is after the August recess, trying to restart the phasing back to in person.
So the one major benefit this summer will be that if you're traveling, it's fairly easy to log in from where you are if you can make the time. It's not impossible under the other system, but it's a little more cumbersome. So please do let Mr. Freed know if you have plans. Otherwise, we'll hope to see you. I want to announce that the Bay Trail is actually going to be closed between. Let me just read this. The East Bay Regional Park District will be closing the Bay Trail between Marina Bay and Point Isabel from June 6th to July 7th for the application of coatings to restore the asphalt trail surface. More street paving. And so basically that'll be from the dog park at Point Isabel to the Discovery Bay connection for that month from early June to early July. So please plan accordingly. Great. Do we have any news on future agenda items?
You can expect a local road safety plan presentation next month, and we have the traffic calming requests and sidewalk program items in the queue.
Great. Then with that, our next meeting is June 23rd. Thank you all, and look forward to seeing you then. Good night.
Thanks, Jared. Thanks, Seth.